Today's World Insight, the need for global approach to epidemics, in the words of a respected epidemiologist. And day one of the China-U.S. Phase 1 trade deal. What's in store for the agreement? Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. Let's start today's program with the latest on the coronavirus, officially known as COVID-19. The total number of confirmed cases in China has passed the 60,000, while over 7,000 people have recovered. The death toll stands at over 1,300. Across the country, though, more than 1,700 medical workers have been infected. 6 of them have died. And new cases of COVID-19 in China show a slower rise after Thursday's massive jump when Hubei province started including results from both clinical diagnosis and lab testing. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization said it was on board with Hubei province's new approach to confirming COVID-19 cases. The WHO emergencies chief said new testing should allow clinicians to report cases more quickly and cautioned the spike did not represent a sudden surge in new infections.
In Hubei province only, a trained medical professional can now classify a suspected case of COVID-19 as a clinically confirmed case on the basis of chest imaging rather than having to have a laboratory confirmation. This allows clinicians to move and report cases more quickly, not having to wait for lab confirmation, ensuring that people get to clinical care more quickly, and also allows public health responses in terms of contact tracing and other important public health measures to be initiated.
Let's continue our program about the novel coronavirus outbreak. The U.S. Congress recently held an open hearing to assess the COVID-19 outbreak. Epidemiologists and experts attending the hearing called for realistic policies on global collaboration, stressing the need for consensus on what data to share and what rules to follow. Among the epidemiologists is Dr. Jennifer Huang Wei, a senior policy researcher and Tang Chair in China Policy Studies at RAND Corporation. In our exclusive interview, she mentioned and emphasized the epidemic is a battle between humans and viruses, not between people or countries. And now is the time for collaboration in our response together. Let's listen in. Welcome to our program, Jennifer. Tell us more about the latest situation in the United States. I see you are in red. Obviously, you're trying to express best wishes for this fight against the coronavirus worldwide.
Certainly, yeah. Red is my favorite color, so that's why I'm wearing red.
Thank
and
you.
Also, certainly, this is, I hope, the best for all the Chinese people for the Chinese New Year.
What do you make of the measures being taken by the U.S. side in terms of protecting its own citizens against the virus?
Yeah, I think it's unprecedented. The travel ban that has been announced a couple of weeks ago, I think in a way that's showing that the U.S. CDC really trying their best, try to contain the virus spreading in the United States. Yeah.
Some have been suggesting whether there have been some overreactions. Others say, well, as much as we know now about the virus, it's better to be precautious as much as possible. So what's your take as a scholar in the field?
Well, I think every measure has its price. I think if I'm only considering from the public health perspective, yes, social distancing, given that there's no effective vaccine and there's no targeted treatment, social distancing is the only way to protect the population from a pandemic. However, I think whether it's travel ban or quarantine, it also has the price of economic price, social price. So there are people that are sacrificing because of all these measures. So we usually think, you have to be very careful when implementing these policies. And also sometimes it's giving people a false security that they feel that, okay, there's a travel ban, then the disease will not come into this country. That is not true, because even with a travel ban, a epidemic like this will be trickling in. It may slow down a little bit, but I don't think the travel ban itself can really protect the United States.
Now, some been suggesting that as long as China hold on to the front line of fight against this novel coronavirus, it's very unlikely that the other countries have to fight a big battle. Your take?
Again, it depends on what kind of epidemic we are facing. I think this novel coronavirus is highly contagious. So we already seen that cases are going up in many countries. Some of the countries already having the local community transmission. So I think for the virus like this to be contained in one area is probably not very likely to happen, even though we hope that will happen. I think what China has done with the quarantine and right now with many countries' travel ban, I think what we hope to see is that it will slow down the epidemic so that other countries in other areas can buy some time to prepare for the epidemic.
I see. I understand, Jennifer, earlier you were at one of the latest hearings on the Congress suggesting about what should be done from the U.S. side about the latest outbreak, coronavirus, and your suggestions as well. How much knowledge and information do you think when you were testifying over there about the people who were in the room, and including those that have been working on the Capitol Hill for decades?
It was hosted by the Committee of the Foreign Affairs. And they invited me about a week before this hearing. They asked me if I would like to testify, and I said, okay, I can provide based on my knowledge about U.S.-China collaborations in the past on epidemic controls, and also maybe talk a little bit about China's management response to this epidemic. So at the time, I think when we get to the Hill, and I have two other witnesses on the same panel, and they are both very wonderful scientists and policymakers. I think altogether we made a strong suggestion to the U.S. government so that they're not only thinking about the social distancing policy, but also think about as a concerted effort to think about how to control the rumors as well as discriminations against Chinese American during this Chinese American or Chinese who are in this country that's been discriminated because of this epidemic.
Earlier, Dr. Bui, we heard that even some members of the Congress were suggesting, of course that was being laughed off by many, that it was a so-called biological weapon invented by China, the virus itself. That was, of course, being even asked to the Chinese ambassador, Cui Tiankai, in the United States. Ambassador brushed it off and saying, are those things believable?
Of course, there are all kinds of speculation and rumors. There are people who are saying that these viruses are coming from some military lab, not of China, maybe in the United States. How can we believe all these crazy things?
You think it's crazy? Where did the virus come from?
Absolutely crazy.
Where did the virus come from?
We still don't know yet. It's probably, according to some initial outcome of the research, probably coming from some animals. But we have to discover more about it.
From an expert's perspective, like you, I'm not talking about whether we are Chinese or American or anywhere, but just from an expert's perspective, what do you make of statements like this? And any scientific basis behind the statement at all?
I won't say scientific basis, but maybe from a social science perspective, what we often see is that a parallel to an epidemic of health issues, there are usually another two epidemics. One is the epidemic of rumors, of conspiracy theories. This happens every time when there's a scary epidemic happening.
Social media companies are now faced with another problem: misinformation.
Fake alerts suggesting that Chinese Red Bull, fortune cookies or mee goreng noodles could give you coronavirus. All of those fake.
The coronavirus outbreak has led to complaints about a rise in anti-Chinese sentiment around the world. In France, for example, a regional newspaper has had to apologize for this headline that used the phrase yellow alerts, while scenes like this one you're about to see here are widespread, of people appearing to cover their face just because they're sitting next to someone who's Asian.
CNBC is reporting that Lyft and Uber drivers are refusing to pick up passengers with Asian-sounding last names out of fear of the coronavirus, saying it isn't safe to pick up those riders.
As a Chinese American yourself, and also who have been witnessing the evolution this time of this pandemic of discrimination, do you think there's any cure?
Well, the cure is, again, back to the science. I mean, I'm also a scientist, so I think science often is the best defense. So that's why I talked about this. This is a battle between human and a virus. It's between species. It's not between a person to another person. It's not between, a political party versus another political party, and it's not between countries and countries. So I think that is one way to think, whichever we fear. I think fear is often very natural to our human instincts. But how to justify whether that instinct is correct or not, we better look for scientific facts. And the other thing is, we cannot ignore some of the geopolitics, or some people really just want to, make rumors or make waves, or
take advantage of the situation.
Exactly. That may happen too. So I think in that situation, it really needs a society to justify, where we want to go. Right?
Yeah.
So I have to say personally, I'm living in the United States. I haven't experienced a lot of discrimination, because I think this society is very careful of the racial relationship and about discriminations. So I think I actually benefit from the public's understanding of the harm of racism and discrimination.
We hope this will be another food for thought, at least at this time, what we are experiencing right now. Another question is about collaboration, which you mentioned earlier in your answer. What about the level of collaboration in terms of scientific research, as far as you know, as a scientist, between China and the United States about coronavirus or novel coronavirus, and specifically this time?
Yeah, I feel that unfortunately this time I haven't seen a lot of collaborations. I mean, we are only 6 weeks into the full-blown epidemic. I still have hope that U.S. and Chinese scientists can work together. But I have to say, I've been working in China on HIV preventions since 2005. And I have to say, after SARS, especially started from 2004 to 2005, there was a lot of collaborations of Chinese CDC with not just U.S., but also many other international communities. Myself, I feel that I benefit from that environment, that many people experts from all over the world work together and helping China to set up the surveillance system and to conduct some of the capacity building. And I have to say, among the scientists, we all respect each other very well. So that's a really great environment for scientists. But that has changed just in the last few years. I feel that especially between U.S. and China, there are definitely some tensions that spill over to the scientific collaborations.
Dr. Bui, earlier we know at the early time, the Chinese side already put forward to the WHO about the gene data of this novel coronavirus. How much progress, as far as you know, have been made so far in terms of research about the virus, and also come up with relevant research regarding the therapeutic treatment as well as vaccines? Well, we have very mixed messages these days. You know, you hear one message coming up saying, oh, it's coming up right soon, very soon, and the other say, oh, it's not. So there are a lot of mixed information. From your perspective, to what you really know now in terms of the research?
Well, first of all, I really want to congratulate the Chinese scientists who certainly there are, you know, centers or labs, many scientists working together to isolate this new virus very quickly after the public health emergency announcement. And I think it was basically within 7 days they isolated the virus, and then within 11 days after the public announcement, they already sequencing the genomic information and shared with the global platform, on the global platform, so that scientists from many countries can work on it immediately at the same time. So I think that's a great progress, and that helps a couple of things. One is that it helps cases from other countries all over in other areas that can link directly to this epidemic. Secondly, it helps scientists to monitor the mutation of the virus, because if the virus mutates, it can change the contagiousness, the infectivity, and it can change the virulence of the virus. So far, we have the scientists has been monitoring this virus, and there are not so much changes, which is good news. Good news for the vaccine development too, because the vaccine development really relying on the characteristic of the virus. So talking about the vaccine. It takes at least 2 to 3 months to get to you know, past the animal model and get to the first phase of phase 1 of the testing.
Absolutely.
And phase 1 is really just looking at the you know, whether people can tolerate the vaccine, the toxicity of the vaccine. And then that would take about a couple of months. And then phase 2, which is a larger study, will usually take more time. And once it gets to the phase 3, usually that's when we look at the effectiveness of this vaccine, that needs even larger, bigger clinical trials to conduct the phase 3. And then from phase 3 being approved to production, that's usually really, if the fastest way to do it would be within a year.
Jennifer Huang Bui, what a pleasure to have you. Thank you for your best wishes also for the Chinese people. Really appreciate it. All the best to you as well.
Thank you.
Jennifer Huang Bui, who is an epidemiologist coming from the United States. Thank you so much for her sharing her insight. Still to come on our program. Day 1 of the China-U.S. Phase 1 trade deal. What's in store for the agreement? That's up for discussion, particularly this time when there's coronavirus outbreak in China. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. An initial trade agreement between China and the U.S. takes effect today, on Friday. It means some bilateral tariffs will be either slashed or lifted. But the U.S. has left the steepest duties in place, for now, that is. And the brewing viral epidemic means there's likely to be an extra hurdle for some importers and exporters. Take a look.
Signed 1 month ago and now in force.
A transformative deal that will bring tremendous benefits to both countries.
And partially restoring normal service between the world's most important trading partners.
On the basis of equality and mutual respect, we have reached this Phase 1 trade agreement.
But leveling what President Trump deemed an unfair playing field comes at a cost. China is buying more U.S. goods and services while improving both market access and intellectual property protection for American companies doing business there. In exchange, Washington is reducing and lifting some of the tariffs, effectively taxing the entire volume of Chinese imports into the U.S. But there's a huge caveat. And if the current deal provides some trade relief, there's concern about the impact of shutdowns imposed by the coronavirus.
We haven't heard China ask yet for any special treatment or waiver of certain deadlines because of the outbreak, but we've heard Larry Kudlow and other advisors around the president suggest that China probably will, at least in the short term, struggle to reach some of its purchase commitments.
While China acknowledges any economic impact would spill over to other countries, it says enough is being done to minimize the fallout.
For more on the China-U.S. trade agreement coming into force, joining us in Hong Kong is Edward Xie, CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company. In Washington, D.C., Jeff Moon, former assistant U.S. trade rep for China. And in New York, last but not least, we want to also welcome Robert Hormat, vice chairman of the Kissinger Associates. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. First of all, Mr. Xie, there's one Chinese voice among all the panelists today because of the difficulties of inviting guests into our studio due to the outbreak. So with you representing somewhat the Chinese stance, help us understand what is the latest from China's perspective in terms of the tariffs and also in terms of proceed with the agreement.
Well, as you know, the discussion on the trade, with the U.S. government was just finishing, and then the coronavirus sort of came out from almost from nowhere, and China was under double shock in a very short period of time, and it's created a lot of strain to the China system, and even now a lot of businesses are still closed or semi-closed. A lot of economic activities are really down. And right now the focus of the whole country is on really trying to address the issue of the coronavirus and try to sort of get rid of it. And on top of that, we've got the Phase 1 of the trade agreement now starting today. So it's somewhat of a double whammy to the China system today.
I see. Mr. Hormat, you've been working and also interacting with China for decades. Let me ask you also about that. China has been experiencing some challenges over the past 4 decades, to say the least. What do you make of the latest in terms of its impact on the immediate result of its economy? And how is that likely to be trickling down to the relations, trade particularly, between China and U.S.? Your perspective, sir.
Well, it certainly will slow the Chinese economy down. China's been through periods of this type in the past, but now you have this new trade agreement. I think it is entirely appropriate that China devote its attention and its efforts as a nation to dealing with the coronavirus. The implications for trade with the U.S. at the moment are of secondary or tertiary importance. And the United States has to understand that a country that is experiencing slower growth, where there will not be as much travel, where a lot of businesses that supply to American companies will be closed or semi-closed. A lot of movie theaters won't be showing American movies, or any movies for that matter, and people will not perhaps be consuming as much or going to the malls as much. So at this point, there will be inevitably some reduction in American sales to China of a variety of things. The U.S. has to understand this is an extenuating circumstance. China is appropriately developing programs to deal with the coronavirus, and it will have a temporary impact on American trade. And the U.S. has to understand this and not make a big political issue over it or a big trade issue over it. It'll come. This will be dealt with over time. The Chinese are doing a good job, I think, in attempting to deal with it. But the United States has to give China time and be understanding if demand for American goods slows substantially, which it may.
Mr. Moon, according to the U.S.-China Business Council Vice President, now many of the U.S. businesses did not expect such a thing, meaning a slowdown in the provision of goods coming from the Chinese side as a result of this lockdown and shutdown of businesses due to the prevention and control of the coronavirus. Now, also you have Federal Reserve talking about there is likely to be some impact from the virus, even though it did not specifically give details as to what extent. Mr. Moon, what do you think might be the impact on the U.S. business from the trade perspective as well? What do you make also of your colleague, Mr. Hormat's view that U.S. should be understanding the current realities China is facing right now and thinking about long term?
I agree with Mr. Hormat's view that China's priority has to be the coronavirus, and we need to take that into account. But we need to think carefully about what the impact is going to be and what it won't be. The coronavirus will impact in-person work and consumption. And history teaches us, there have been several of these kinds of virus outbreaks. History teaches us that the impact is going to be temporary, maybe several months. The Phase 1 trade deal is a 2-year agreement, and it involves 2 large baskets of things. It involves policy changes, which are not in-person activities that can be implemented almost immediately, and then it involves the purchases of goods that will be impacted. And as I said, this is a 2-year agreement. The majority of the purchases actually happen in the 2nd year, not in the 1st year. So I think that we need to remember that this is a temporary phenomenon. We need to work through it. But I think that with good faith on both sides, that we can fulfill the terms of the agreement over the long term.
Yeah. Mr. Xie, your response, particularly general picture of the Chinese economy, IMF suggesting it's likely to be a V sign in a way going down, but coming up back after the outbreak comes to an end. Meanwhile, China and the U.S. immediate longer term. Mr. Xie.
Certainly, the coronavirus is having a severe short-term impact on the Chinese economy. I anticipate the first quarter of this year, the economic growth rate is going to be pretty minimal. Second quarter, there may be a little bit of an increase, but still going to be pretty tough. I would expect, however, that with the coronavirus receding, hopefully, by the end of before the end of the second quarter, the rest of the year we're going to see a very strong rebound. In fact, as you know, in China we are already talking about, or we are already experiencing about, very vibrant activities in a number of sectors. For example, online, education, distributed working methods, and so on. So we expect there will be activities along these dimensions beyond the virus that is going to, be a driver for economic growth, in addition to the government's effort in providing the fixed asset investment, which I think is going to happen. So I think the second half of this year we're going to see a very strong rebound in China's economy.
It has a lot to do with how Chinese economy will be like. It also has a lot to do with how the two sides are going to implement their own commitments. And it has a lot to do with how the two countries and the two people see one another. Mr. Hormat, since I'm asking that question, I have to get your views about how the U.S. and the U.S. people are seeing China. We have been seeing media reports suggesting, for example, the Wall Street Journal editorial the other day CIA was using so-called the sick man of East Asia. Now, that was a very much an offending phrase, if you know China's history. We also heard from the Commerce Ministry not long ago, not necessarily very friendly remarks, but at the same time, we see different voices in the administration even. Mr. Kudlow, for example, have been expressing sympathies and empathies toward China, and some of the other officials as well. So how should we understand, Mr. Hormat, the mixture of voices that is now in the U.S. Society, particularly here in China? You do not see many people could still travel to the U.S. due to the travel ban. So how should we understand what the U.S. is thinking, whether from the government or from the general society, Mr. Hormat?
Well, first of all, let me say I agree with the point that was made. This is a 2-year agreement. And even if there's a slowdown in Chinese purchases during the period of the coronavirus and dealing with it, it's a longer-term agreement. And I do think over a period of time, the key elements of the agreement will begin to emerge again, and the numbers will grow as the Chinese economy recovers. I very much agree with that. What I was worrying about in particular at the moment is we shouldn't be impatient and demand that China deal with this right away. The coronavirus is what they really need to deal with right away, not so much buying American goods right away. That's going to slow down. But long term, there'll be a different and a better story.
Yeah.
The point you've made is a very good one. I think that there is the biggest deficit in the imbalance, or the biggest imbalance between the two countries, really is, in a way, a trust imbalance that has developed over the last several years. And I think that we're not going to be able to move effectively toward phase 2 or this new strategic economic dialogue and confine it only to trade. We've got to have a much deeper dialogue among political leaders and strategic thinkers on how to strengthen overall relations between the United States and China over not the next 1 or 2 or 3 years, but over the next decade. And you can't isolate trade from the broader dialogue to develop strategic understandings between the two countries and to reduce that large trust imbalance that has emerged. Because as long as that emerges, and as long as there are a lot of misgivings and suspicions on the security side, it's because so many trade issues in high tech relate not just to commercial issues, but to potential strategic issues for technology. As long as that strategic misunderstanding or mistrust continues, it's going to lead people who want to reduce technology trade or technology interaction, or even, as Jennifer said in the earlier piece, scientific collaboration. A lot of that is suffering because of this trust deficit, and a lot of it because we're not really dealing with some of the broader strategic understandings which we need to underpin or complement improved trade relations. And we'll have more divisions if we don't deal with those issues in the next round, not just trade, but the broader strategic relationship.
Mr. Moon, I want to ask the same or similar question. Now, at a time of human disasters such as virus and the outbreak of virus, what do you make of some of the very mixed voices in your society about what China needs to face right now in terms of fighting the virus and the survival of the people, Mr. Moon?
I think the key here is transparency. As you said earlier in the program, or some of the guests said, there are rumors.
Transparency in your society or in my society. I'm asking you about how would you respond to the mixed voices in your society regarding China's right now fight against the coronavirus, particularly if I could mention the early Wall Street Journal report, which they later apologized, and also some remarks from your Commerce Secretary suggesting it could be a good opportunity for American businesses. Of course, I do not want to deny, and I want to emphasize here, in fact, there are many other very positive, very friendly voices coming from your society as well toward China, from the business community, from the general public, from the organizations, civil societies. But how should we, people here in China, not many of them would be able to travel to the U.S. due to the travel ban. How should we understand this mixed of voices coming out of the U.S.? Which one are the voices that we should trust or not?
we need to remain focused on building the relationship, fostering the international cooperation that will serve the bilateral relationship, and also help us deal with this coronavirus threat. And we need to exercise demonstrations of goodwill. The U.S. business community has sent millions of dollars of medical products to China, for example, which is very helpful. And we need to tune out those who are spreading rumors and trying to sow distrust. And in the specific context of the coronavirus situation, I really do think, as I said before, transparency, getting the real facts out, getting experts, international experts on the ground is key to dispelling all of these problems and letting everyone know that people are working in good faith for the benefit of all.
Great point. Mr. Xie, now, from what we are having right now, this is in the very middle of this fight against the coronavirus outbreak. We have an overall battle in Wuhan and in Hubei province. We heard earlier in our program also, more than 15,000 medical workers were actually infected by the virus. That's a very big number if we think about the fight that we need to fight right now. Mr. Xie, we do not know when is the end of this battle. So what is, from China's perspective, the best way to work with the international community and also with the work with the American counterparts on trade and also on international collaboration regarding the outbreak and some of the other issues, eventually to build trust, hopefully, Mr. Xie?
Yeah, you know, the priority right now is absolutely try to deal with the coronavirus, and China as a whole country is really mobilizing a lot of resources against this issue. You know, at the same time, we already have been seeing a lot of support from many other countries in the world, including the USA, but also many other countries who have pledged the support in various forms, in particular in terms of materials and also the expertise to help China to address this issue. I think this is a very good sign. China needs to continue to work and be very open to collaborate with the international community with this focus on addressing the issue. You know, the issue that we're now facing is not a national issue. This is really in a way, unfortunately, it's a global issue because the virus really doesn't know national borders. You know, a lot of people, unfortunately, in many other countries have already been inflated by the virus. And I think this is now an important time for, you know, many countries, if not all the countries in the world, to try to address this issue on a collaborative basis rather than thinking about their own issues on a national basis. I think this, from this standpoint, this is somewhat of a silver lining, because as you know, before this virus, you know, the mood of the world was very much towards more nationalism, you know, protectionism, me first, you last, that kind of mentality, which of course was not very healthy. But this virus hopefully would change somewhat of that kind of mindset.
Is this the silver lining that could really happen? Mr. Hormats, are you that optimistic that people could move their eyes away a bit and to take a look at the real global challenges? Public health is one of them, even between China and the United States, Mr. Hormats?
I hope so. I think this was a very, very important point that you just heard, that many of the issues in the world today do not know borders. They transcend borders. And pandemics are one, climate is another. There are a wide range of other issues that governments are going to have to work together on in order to deal with successfully. And it may well be that this reminds us, in a very tragic way, unfortunately, that when something of this nature occurs, it is not a national issue, one nation versus another, and it would be exactly the wrong thing for the United States to be critical of China or to say adverse things about China. The key is to work together. And I think more and more of the issues, either it's financial contamination, financial crises, health crises, climate crises. Countries have to work together, and it may well be that it reminds countries that it's not America first or any other country first. It's a collective set of actions that are required. We should be supportive of China. Many companies are, and many parts of the U.S. government are, in our Center for Disease Control, for instance. But we've got to do this on a broader basis and a sustained basis.
Okay, Mr. Moon, you only have 30 seconds left before we wrap up.
Well, all I would say is I agree on the importance of working together on transnational issues. In terms of bilateral issues, there's a lot that can be done. We hear about the presidential phone calls, but I know from having worked in the White House that most of the on-the-ground work happens by video conference between Washington and Beijing. In the trade context, all of that can continue, and discussions about a Phase 2 deal can start as well, and policy discussions about how to implement IPR and other commitments within China can also continue. So I think we need to recognize the importance, but do what we can.
Thank you so much. The three of you, really appreciate it. Jeff Moon, Edward Xie, last but not least, Robert Hormats. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, you can find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook accounts. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching, and bye for now.